On a grey Thursday afternoon in November 1978, the parking lot behind the Potomac Ridge Shopping Center looked like any other suburban sprawl: wide asphalt, fading white lines, and the constant shuffle of commuters trying to squeeze errands into the last hour of daylight. It was the kind of place where nothing important ever happened, where people forgot their grocery lists, where teenagers practiced parking for their driver's exams, where the world moved in small, quiet motions. And it was precisely here, in the most ordinary of settings, that the first crack in a Soviet courier route would open. Small, accidental, and almost invisible. Julia Hartman, a part-time librarian at Arlington Public, had just locked her sedan and was walking toward the pharmacy entrance when a sudden crunch behind her cut through the hum of evening traffic. She turned and saw a dark blue Chevy Nova backing out too quickly, its bumper clipping the rear corner of a grey Plymouth. The impact was minor, a jolt, a scrape, the kind of collision people curse about and then forget by morning. But the driver of the Nova reacted in a way that didn't match the scale of the accident. Instead of stepping out, apologizing, or even checking the damage, he froze, hands gripping the wheel, eyes locked on the rearview mirror as if calculating something far beyond insurance deductibles. Julia took a few cautious steps toward the scene, expecting a confrontation, or at least an exchange of license numbers. Instead, the man in the Nova popped open his trunk, rummaged with frantic precision, and slammed it shut. A small canvas pouch, green, military-looking, fell to the ground. The man glanced at her only once, a quick cut of his eyes that seemed to measure her. Age, posture, distance, threat. Then he got back in his car, started the engine, and accelerated out of the lot with a speed and sharpness that suggested he wasn't fleeing responsibility. He was fleeing something far more consequential. Julia bent down and picked up the pouch. It was heavier than it looked. The zipper was stiff, the fabric worn smooth at the edges, the kind of item carried for years rather than bought last week. Her first assumption was mundane. But when she pulled the zipper halfway, inside were tightly folded sheets wrapped in wax paper, a strip of microfilm, and a smaller envelope with hand-drawn symbols, arrows, circles, numbers, marking what looked like a map of the Beltway. She zipped it shut again, heart thudding, suddenly aware that the space around her felt too open, too exposed. A librarian had no business standing in the middle of a strip mall parking lot holding something that felt like evidence. She tried to wave off the thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was eccentric hobbyist stuff. But the look in the driver's eyes had not been the look of a hobbyist. It had been the look of a man whose routine had just been interrupted in the one place he couldn't afford it. By the time Julia walked into the pharmacy, she already knew two things. The man wasn't coming back for the pouch, and whatever was inside, it wasn't meant to be found by anyone at all. Julia didn't sleep that night. The canvas pouch sat on her kitchen table like an object emitting its own gravity, pulling every thought back toward it. She had placed a dish towel over it, as if that thin layer of fabric could mute whatever danger it carried. But each time she walked past, she felt the same tightening in her chest, a sense that she was now entangled in something not meant for civilians, not meant for anyone outside a very specific circle of men who lived in shadows. By morning, she made the only decision that felt remotely sane: take the pouch to the police. But somewhere between her house and the Arlington County station, she changed direction. Not consciously, not dramatically. Simply a quiet left turn that replaced one destination with another. The FBI field office on North Randolph Street. It wasn't patriotism, it wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. An instinct formed in that parking lot in the moment she saw the driver's face, in the way his eyes had darted across the asphalt as though expecting to see surveillance. Inside the FBI lobby, A young clerk asked her to sign a visitor sheet. Julia placed the pouch on the counter and whispered, "I think someone dropped this yesterday. I think it might be important." The clerk's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not alarm, but alertness, and within minutes she was escorted to a small interview room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and copier toner. Special Agent Thomas Avery entered with a notepad, wearing the neutral expression of a man trained to extract truth without revealing how much he already suspected. Julia told him everything. The sound of the collision, the way the man had reacted, the pouch falling unnoticed, the pages wrapped in wax paper. Avery listened without interruption. But when she described the microfilm strip, his pen paused mid-sentence. "May I?" he asked finally. Julia slid the pouch across the table. Avery opened it carefully, using a handkerchief as if fingerprints mattered, and they did. He unfolded one page, then another, his brow tensing at the symbols. Highways, access roads, delivery times marked with military precision. A sequence of numbers repeated across 3 separate sheets. And the microfilm, too short to be random, too carefully cut to be amateur. It was all wrong for civilian use. Too structured to be accidental. Avery didn't look up when he spoke. "Miss Hartman, this isn't local. And it's not domestic. What does that mean?" she asked. He folded the map and slid it back inside. "It means the man you saw yesterday wasn't running from an insurance claim." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air tighter. Avery leaned forward. "People don't build this kind of material unless they're moving something important or someone important. This looks like a courier route, a very practiced one." Julia felt a chill run beneath her ribs. "Courier? For who?" Avery hesitated, the kind of hesitation that reveals more than an answer. Then he said it quietly, without theatrics, as if stating the weather. "Likely Soviet." The words settled into the space between them like a weight. Soviet. In the late 70s, it didn't just describe a nationality, it described an ecosystem. Handlers, cutouts, coded deliveries, dead drops, compromat, and operations that threaded through cities like invisible veins. Avery closed the pouch. "Miss Hartman, we need your help. I think you witnessed the break in a pattern we've been trying to identify for years." And just like that, the parking lot accident she'd nearly dismissed as nothing became something far larger. An exposed nerve in a network that was never supposed to misfire. Agent Avery didn't waste time. Within hours, Julia found herself seated in an unmarked sedan, gliding down the same stretch of asphalt where the fender-bender had occurred. The world outside looked unchanged, office workers crossing the street with coffee cups, buses exhaling at stoplights, a delivery truck backing into a loading bay. But Julia now saw everything differently. The ordinary felt staged. The familiar felt fragile. Avery pointed toward the plaza. That tree line, those dumpsters, the service road wrapping behind the buildings, this whole layout lends itself to signal concealment. "Whoever your man is, he's been here before." Julia nodded uneasily. She could still recall the expression on his face when the pouch had slipped free, an expression too sharp, too practiced to belong to someone worried about insurance details. Avery had agents walking the perimeter in plain clothes, and Julia watched as they moved with a kind of purposeful stillness, as if aware that eyes might be watching from windows or rooftops. They weren't searching for the courier. Avery handed Julia a set of photos clipped to a board. "We've been tracking a pattern of short-distance travel by unidentified individuals connected to Soviet diplomatic circles," he said. "Same vehicles cycling through the same low-value commercial areas. Nothing illegal on its face, until something breaks the rhythm. John, well, the Pornley, Marner." The photos showed parking lots not unlike this one, each marked with timestamps and arrows. a pharmacy in Fairfax, a library in Rockville, a diner outside Bethesda, different places, different months, but identical behaviors. A man enters. A man exits. Something small changes hands. No transaction. No conversation. Then Avery tapped the last photo, the newest. A sedan. Paused mid-frame at the edge of the Arlington Plaza. Julia frowned. That's the same make. Same year. Avery gave a slow nod. But more important than the car is that it stopped in the exact same position your driver braked yesterday, for 13 seconds. Every trip, every month. The fog thickened metaphorically and almost literally as a winter haze rolled across the parking lot. Julia felt her skin prickle. So he was part of this pattern? Avery leaned back. Not just part of it. He might be the anchor point. Julia wasn't sure what that meant, but the gravity in his voice made her pulse quicken. The anchor point. The one courier whose route others mirrored. The fulcrum of an operation whose purpose remained obscured. Soviet networks rarely allowed deviation. Everything was structural, geometric, clock-bound. Precision was survival. But yesterday, they slipped. Avery stepped out of the car. He pointed at the shallow skid marks still visible near the curb. Couriers don't get into accidents. They drive slow. They scan their mirrors. They plan routes, so nothing unpredictable happens. But your driver, he hit a car hard enough to drop his pouch and break a 2-year sequence. Julia swallowed. So the accident forced them off script. Exactly, Avery said. And when a Soviet script breaks, that's when we see what the play was about. Iconium. The wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint, unrelated, but strangely fitting, because Julia now understood. Nothing about her day had been random. Not the collision, not the pouch, not her decision to keep it. She had stepped accidentally into a hidden corridor of the Cold War. And now, because of one broken pattern, the dark was beginning to take shape. The next morning, the FBI surveillance van eased into position behind a row of recycling bins behind the same Arlington complex. Julia sat inside. Headset pressed lightly over one ear, the hum of electronics filling the cramped interior. She wasn't supposed to be there. Avery had made that clear, but she was no longer just a witness. She was the variable that had forced an intelligence network to reveal its fracture, and Avery needed someone who had seen the courier up close. Watch the feeds, he told her, nodding toward the bank of monitors showing angles of the lot, sidewalks, alley, the row of dumpsters, and the side road curving behind the buildings. If he reappears, you'll know it before any of us. Fog rolled low across the asphalt, making the morning look softer than it should have. But nothing about the atmosphere inside the van felt soft. Agents rotated between radios, lenses, and maps, layered with red marker lines. Routes traced backward from Arlington to Fairfax, Bethesda, and Rockville. Each line ended abruptly, as if the couriers always vanished into thin air. Why parking lots? Julia whispered. Avery didn't look up, because the geometry works. Open sight lines, predictable traffic, and no one questions a parked car. He paused, then added, it's the closest thing to neutral territory in suburban America. Arpens. One of the monitors flickered as a car pulled into the lot. A nondescript sedan silver, older, well-maintained. Not the courier's exact vehicle, but close enough that Julia's heartbeat stuttered. Relax, an agent murmured. Too early, too clean. But the car didn't park like a normal commuter. Instead of heading toward open spaces, it followed the exact curvature of the lane the courier had taken during the fender-bender right up to the same bend in the curb. Julia leaned in. That's the positioning. Avery straightened. Clock it. The sedan idled. Then it rolled forward and disappeared behind the buildings. Same timing. Julia whispered. 13 seconds. Why 13? Avery exhaled slowly. He tapped a transparent overlay onto a map, thin blue circles radiating outward from the rooftop of a building adjacent to the plaza. A courier route only works if the handler knows precisely when the courier is within range of an echo transmitter. That pause? That's the sync point. Julia stared at the map. So, they weren't meeting people. They were meeting a device. Avery nodded. A Soviet echo repeater. Picks up short-range bursts from couriers, amplifies them, and pushes them toward a long-distance receiver. It's cleaner than traditional drops, harder to intercept, until someone crashes into the courier and knocks his transmitter pouch onto the pavement. Julia felt her stomach tighten. She had shattered a mechanical rhythm the Soviets had trusted implicitly, and in doing so, she'd forced them to test the route again, to see if the equipment still functioned. "Where's the repeater now?" she asked. Avery looked at her with the expression of someone who had already reached a chilling conclusion. "It's still here," he said, "still waiting for a courier who's not coming." Julia glanced back at the monitor, showing the curved lane. "And if it activates again today," Avery's voice lowered, "then we know the Soviets haven't realized their system is broken." A beat. Then another. "And that gives us one shot," he said quietly. Just after 2 p.m. The hour when the courier had paused his car before the fender-bender, a soft crackle flickered through Julia's headset. It was faint, thin, metallic, almost like distant static carried across a winter radio band, but unmistakably artificial. She froze, eyes locked on the audiograph, trembling across the surveillance console. "Signal spike," she whispered. Agent Torres swiveled in her chair, fingers flying over the tuner. "It's narrowband, hyper-local, originating inside the lot." Avery leaned in close. "Julia, is that what you heard when you hit him?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, except this time it's cleaner, like it's not moving," which meant the Soviets hadn't trusted a new courier to test the route. They were testing the device itself. "Visuals up," Avery ordered. Across 6 monitors, the parking lot looked almost painfully ordinary. Minivans, sedans, grocery carts, a woman unloading dry cleaning from her trunk. But the audio spike sharpened, then steadied into a low, almost imperceptible hum. Torres whispered, "Something's transmitting." Julia finished the sentence for her. "Unless it's a passive repeater being illuminated from a distance." Avery's jaw tightened. "Exactly. IBGs. A passive repeater meant the Soviets were pinging the device from somewhere nearby, probing it, waking it, checking whether its internal resonator still responded to the same microbursts their courier used. It meant the device was doing what it always did, listening for a courier's signal, capturing it, and reflecting it toward a distant receiver. And right now, it was listening to nothing because its courier was in FBI custody. The hum grew sharper, as if tuning itself. Avery grabbed the Spectrum printout. "It's scanning, cycling frequencies, looking for the courier," Torres whispered. "If it cycles up to the harmonics, we'll be able to triangulate." "Do it." She switched modes, and the display lit with 3 pulsing arcs, each representing a wave bounce off nearby structures. One struck the metal siding of the dumpster enclosure. One bounced off the second-story balcony rail. The third reflected off a street lamp at the edge of the lot. The intersection of the arcs formed a single glowing point. "There." Torres pointed at the map. "Behind the brick retaining wall. That's where they hid it." Avery's voice dropped to a razor-thin whisper. "Julia, you're coming with me." She didn't argue. The adrenaline had already settled into her bones. The two slipped from the van, moving casually across the lot, acting like two co-workers walking between buildings, because counter-surveillance doctrine was simple. Move like you belong, and no one looks twice. They reached the retaining wall. Moss grew between the bricks. A narrow maintenance gap lay between the wall and the utility shed. Avery knelt first. "Do you hear that?" he murmured. Julia crouched beside him. The hum was stronger now, like an electric heartbeat vibrating through the concrete. Avery slid his flashlight into the gap. Found it. A metal cylinder, barely larger than a lipstick tube, nestled in the shadow between conduit pipes. Avery reached out, but Julia grabbed his wrist. "Wait. If they're pinging it, they're also watching it." Avery turned toward her, realization dawning. They hadn't just exposed the device. They had walked into the middle of its operation, and someone, somewhere close, was watching to see who touched it. Avery froze with his hand suspended in midair, the cold November wind shifting just enough for both him and Julia to hear it. A car engine rumbling somewhere behind the retaining wall, idling low, patient, almost predatory. The hum from the Soviet device pulsed again, this time sharper, as if reacting to the engine's vibration, the way a tuning fork reacts to a nearby piano string. Julia's breath shortened. "They're close. Way too close." "With a do," Avery whispered back. "No courier uses a passive resonator without overwatch." In Soviet tradecraft, a device wasn't just planted and abandoned. There was always someone checking the field, scanning for tails, ensuring the route stayed sterile, and now, with their courier missing, Avery tapped his mic twice, silent alert to the team in the van. Torres responded with a soft click. Backup was moving, but they were at least 90 seconds away. In espionage time, 90 seconds could be an eternity. He tilted the flashlight again, watching the metal tube vibrate gently with every radio pulse hitting its core. The Soviets were sweeping intensities, now probing the device harder, faster. Someone out there was desperate. Then Julia noticed something else. "The shadows," she whispered. "Look at the wall. Is X of them." At the far edge of the retaining wall, a faint shifting silhouette stretched across the bricks, like the outline of a man leaning forward inside a vehicle, adjusting something near the dashboard. A hand rose, paused, and lowered. A moment later, the radio hum sharpened with surgical precision. Avery whispered, "He's changing frequency. He's trying to force a response from the courier's beacon." But the courier's beacon wasn't responding because it was in an FBI evidence vault. Julia's stomach tightened. "If they realize the courier's gone," Avery finished grimly, "they burn the route, retrieve the device, and vanish, and we lose everything." The silhouette moved again. This time the figure opened his door slowly, methodically, like someone stepping into hostile territory. The creak of the hinges carried across the lot. They were out of time. Avery leaned toward Julia. "We can't let him retrieve that device. If he gets it back to a diplomatic facility, and if he sees us touching it," she asked, "then he knows the FBI is here, and the whole network collapses." A door slammed. Footsteps approached, soft, deliberate, trained. Not the walk of a frightened courier, the walk of a man shaped by an intelligence service that expected its officers to be ghosts. Julia's pulse hammered. For the first time, she felt the full weight of what they had stumbled into. No longer a strange accident in a parking lot, no longer a pattern on paper, but a living, breathing fragment of the KGB's invisible machinery, moving toward them one step at a time. Avery let out one controlled breath. "Julia, listen carefully," he whispered. "If he rounds this corner, we're made. On my signal, you move left, I move right. We stay in shadow. Let him commit. Let him go for the device. We gather. And then, she whispered. Avery's voice hardened into the cold, tactical tone of a man who'd lived too long inside the nation's most classified rooms. Then we take him. Alive. The footsteps grew louder, closer, measured. Then, suddenly, a metallic click echoed in the darkness. The KGB watcher had stopped, and he wasn't alone. The metallic click froze Avery and Julia in place. It wasn't a weapon being drawn, it was subtler, sharper. The kind used by KGB field officers to send a quick burst transmission to nearby surveillance teams. Which meant one thing: he hadn't come alone. He'd come with a net. From somewhere beyond the parking lot's edge, another engine coughed to life. Tires crackled against gravel. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. Avery's mind raced. The KGB weren't here to retrieve the device. They were here to sanitize the location, erasing anything that connected their missing courier to the American side. Julia whispered, barely audible. They won't, he said, because they don't know what we know. He reached into his jacket, switched his transmitter from passive relay to burst mode, and tapped out a sequence that only Torres and their counter-surveillance unit understood. It was a trigger, a trap years in the making. Avery had learned long ago that to beat the KGB, you never confront them head-on. You let them walk into a story they think they control, then flip the ending. Down the hill, 3 unmarked FBI sedans lit their engines in perfect unison. No sirens, just motion. Silent, coordinated, surgical. A 4th vehicle, a modified communications van, cut its lights and shifted into intercept position. Julia caught it first. They've been holding perimeter since we left the bureau. Avery nodded. We weren't following the KGB tonight. The KGB was following us. The watcher stepped into the open, now a tall man with hardened features, his coat unbuttoned, hands empty but coiled with intent. He scanned the shadows, searching for a courier who wasn't coming, unaware that the real danger sat just outside his field of vision. He clicked his signal key again, 2 short bursts. The KGB backup vehicles advanced, and that was the moment Torres struck. From behind the retaining wall, 2 agents rose like phantoms. Another pair appeared behind the watcher, weapons drawn but angled low enough to intimidate, not provoke. A 3rd team closed off the lot's only exit. In less than 5 seconds, the hunter had become the one surrounded. Julia stepped forward, her badge glinting faintly in the dark. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Do not move. It's not a... For the first time, the watcher's mask cracked. He understood instantly what had gone wrong. The courier compromised, the route mapped, the technology deciphered. The FBI 1 step ahead at every turn. Avery approached, calm but unyielding. You weren't here to pick up the device, he said quietly. You were here to erase the footprint. Your courier disappeared, and you thought you still controlled the board. The watcher's jaw tightened. You Americans, he muttered, with a faint trace of bitterness. Always believe the game ends when you win a single move. Avery leaned in. This wasn't a single move. We let your network run just long enough to map the entire distribution chain. The courier, the signal markers, the uplink frequencies, even your receiving sites near Roslyn and Arlington, Julia added. The watcher's eyes finally widened, not in fear, but in comprehension. The FBI hadn't just intercepted a Soviet courier system. They'd replicated it, hijacked it, and now they were feeding false intelligence back through the very channels the KGB trusted most. This wasn't a takedown. It was a reversal. Torres moved in with restraints, and the watcher offered no resistance. His silence said everything. The KGB had lost a clean route, a courier, a device prototype, and worst of all, deniability. Moscow would have no way of knowing what intelligence had been compromised or how deeply the Americans had infiltrated their system. As the agents escorted the watcher away, Julia looked up at Avery. "So, is this where we say the Cold War just tilted?" Avery shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "This is where the KGB realizes America was already tilting it with SOM." The night settled over the empty parking lot, the broken fender still resting, where the story began, a mundane spark that had exposed an entire Soviet courier route. In wars fought in shadows, the loudest victories are often silent. And tonight, without a single shot fired, America had outsmarted the KGB.